Essence, Assault on the Mind. Book 1 of the Essence series. Chapter 1. Karl Hoffman. I won't allow it! The voice boomed through the Upper East Side apartment walls down to the Manhattan streets below. It was the voice of a man pacing back and forth before the apartment's window. I won't allow it, he repeated. The man was Dr. Karl Hoffman, a tall, muscular man in his mid-50s, with short gray hair and a closely trimmed Van Dyke beard. He swung his hands through the air as he spoke, pointing at another man, Dr. Paul Silverman, seated just opposite the window. Dr. Silverman, who immigrated from Eastern Europe 20 years earlier, was in his 60s, with a receding hairline and long white hair that flowed over his ears. The two were colleagues at a local university, Hoffman, a professor of neuroscience, and Silverman, a physics professor specializing in string theory, a theory that posits multiple unseen dimensions. Hoffman stopped pacing and pointed a finger at Silverman, continuing his rant. Do not publish that paper now. Karl, I'm simply sharing my work. Your work? Your great revelation. He stopped pacing and held his arms outstretched. Our minds are in another dimension. Who cares? If no one cares, why do you? Because they will care very soon, and your detailed explanations could prove troublesome. Hoffman stopped short and grinned at Silverman. It was a grin that combined a slight curl at the edge of the mouth with enough of a frown to offset any pleasantness, conveying instead utter disdain. That's it, isn't it? You want to save the day. Dr. Silverman, the savior, the white knight, who comes to the rescue, the ethical one. He spoke the word with an evident loathing. We must all pay attention to ethics. You can keep your ethics, Hoffman scoffed. Your sacred cow. You know it's nothing but a euphemism for the weak controlling the strong. You would rather the strong control the weak? Hoffman stared at Silverman, expressionless. What could be more natural? He fixed his eyes on Silverman's, his gaze unwavering, his neck taut. His cheek muscles quivered as his teeth ground together quietly. The furrow between his brows tightened, and several beads of perspiration appeared on his forehead. The two men were motionless. Hoffman stood like a wax figure, his hands just above the lower edges of his jacket, his shoulders and trunk perfectly erect, and his head tilted ever so slightly down at Silverman. Silverman sat with his hands resting on his lap, his shoulders slumped forward, and his neck extended to look up at his colleague. It was as though time itself were frozen in that moment, or the scene were being played back on a screen and some technical malfunction had stopped it cold. The only traces of motion breaking the unnatural stillness were the beads of perspiration forming on Hoffman's forehead and the subtle quivering of his cheeks. As suddenly as it began, Hoffman's frozen effect softened, and his face dissolved into a serene, placid look. Very well, he capitulated. I'm heading over to Brooklyn now. The corners of Hoffman's jacket flapped against his sides as he marched towards the door. Meanwhile, Dr. Silverman quietly got up from his chair and moved to the kitchen, filling a glass with water. Drinking it down, he filled another and said, Have a good day, Karl. Yes, you too, Paul, Hoffman said with a furtive smile as he watched Dr. Silverman filling his glass. A moment later, Hoffman was out the door. Dr. Silverman's nephew, Jonathan, who was visiting from Virginia, emerged from another room. Where does he get off? He asked. He's passionate about his work, Dr. Silverman explained. He's an arrogant SOB. How can you stand him? Oh, I've known Karl for many years. He's very accomplished. Maybe too accomplished, he added under his breath. What's that, Uncle Paul? Oh, well, you see, he's made an app to connect your brain to your phone. No wires. You think of a letter and it appears on the screen. For real? Yes, for real, Dr. Silverman laughed. How? No wires? How can your thoughts just go from your brain into your phone? Thoughts are electricity, Jonathan. You know EEGs when we measure that electricity, yes? Well, that electricity changes the electromagnetic field around your head, around your body, even around your hand holding your phone. That's amazing. Yes, but what? You're worried about something, aren't you? What was that about ethics? Connections go both ways, Dr. Silverman explained. If your brain can connect to the phone can also connect to your brain. What do you mean? Like subliminal advertising? So when I'm surfing for something, my phone will tell me, Buy that? Jonathan chuckled. Better turn off that one-touch buying. Dr. Silverman nodded. It's more than that. You tell people what to buy, okay, but then you tell them what to think, how to vote. Where does it end? That much power corrupts even the strongest of men. You think there's that much power in a phone app? It's not in the phone, Dr. Silverman exclaimed with such fervor that Jonathan was visibly startled. I'm sorry, Jonathan, I'm sorry. He put a hand on his nephew's shoulder and led him to the sofa where they both sat down. You see, he continued, without free thought there is no freedom. Justice, injustice, right, wrong, good, and evil. What do these words mean? You must be free to think for yourself. It cannot be dictated to you. You know, I've told you this. His nephew nodded. I've seen the evil that comes when people stop thinking. He looked past his nephew and, frowning, closed his eyes. Dr. Silverman had spent most of his life in communist Bulgaria and had lost friends, colleagues, and family members to political imprisonment and execution. So why doesn't he want you to publish your paper? What's in it? Jonathan asked. The antidote. If it's not too late. Dr. Silverman gazed across the room towards the door Hoffman had just gone out of. His eyes widened as though trying to see past it, and then regained their usual gentle, smiling appearance. He took a deep breath and, sharing a broad smile, added, Maybe I just worry too much. Karl's a good man. The things I've seen, that was another time. Yeah, well, don't let him bully you, Uncle Paul. Listen, are you okay? Do you need anything? I was going to meet up with the guys for the day, but I can call it off. No, you have a good time, and I'll see you when you get back. Okay, Uncle Paul, I'll see you later then, Jonathan replied as he put on his coat and headed out. Dr. Silverman looked out the window at the East River, letting out a soft sigh. He returned to the kitchen to refill his glass. The morning sun was still low in the sky when Hoffman arrived at his destination in Brooklyn, a warehouse loft near a highway overpass. He appeared tall, even in the large open space of the loft, taller still as he towered over two other men who stood at his side. One was Henry Miller, a congressman, conspicuously well dressed in a silk suit with a brightly colored tie and polished shoes. The whiteness of his teeth glimmered sporadically through his barely parted lips, and his hair, exceptionally dark and full, contrasted with his forehead and cheek lines that divulged his true age. The other man was Kyle Williams, a Wall Street stockbroker, about the same height as Miller, but much rounder. His protruding abdomen an insurmountable barrier to his suit's closure, a suit custom-tailored a year earlier. He was nearly bald, and though half Miller's age, appeared to be more his contemporary than his younger companion. He shifted his weight nervously from left to right foot, looking quickly at Miller, then Hoffman. Why did you want to meet here? Williams asked Hoffman, who was drumming his fingertips on the glass windowpane. Did you know glass is a liquid? Hoffman asked, continuing to tap the glass. The two men frowned at each other. No, Williams answered finally. Didn't know that. It's a slowly moving liquid, not a solid. You see it in old buildings like this. Look at the waves in this glass. For the past 60 years, the glass has been streaming downhill with gravity, moving so slowly that no one could see it move. But after decades have passed, one can see the evidence that it has moved in this rippling distortion. Now, of course, he stopped drumming his fingers and glanced toward the two men. It's too late. Too late for what? Williams asked. Perception, Hoffman responded. The congressman, Miller, sighed audibly, rolling his eyes at Williams. Perception is power, Hoffman seethed. You want power, don't you? He asked, pivoting towards the congressman, who looked away when he caught Hoffman's glance. Then you need to be more perceptive. Okay, Williams acknowledged, sending an impatient glance towards Miller, who continued to roll his eyes, but sighed more quietly. Everything's going very well, Williams continued. We've got over 1 million users now. I can run the numbers for you and show you where they are geographically, but I need my computer. Why are we in this old warehouse? We need some muscle, Hoffman answered. Look, Miller barked, I could get muscle for a hell of a lot less than I'm paying you. You guaranteed me votes, not coercion. Who said it was for you? Hoffman asked dryly. Silence hung between the men like a shroud, broken finally by the sound of an opening door scraping along the floor. On the opposite side of the room, 5 men moved like a spearhead through the doorway. The man in front, trailed by two on each side of him, stopped, and the others lined up alongside him. "Which one of you's Hoffman?" the man in front asked. "That would be me," Hoffman replied, remaining by the window and staring intently at the man. "You're Spinoza." "I heard you might be interested in our services," the man answered without acknowledging Hoffman's question. "Protection. We need protection. You can provide that, can't you?" Hoffman inquired. "Yeah, for a price." "I can offer you something more than money," Hoffman retorted. "Don't waste my time." "How would you like to be invincible?" When Hoffman asked this, the man turned his head to his associates and laughed. "Invincible? I'm the most invincible guy in this room. You want to see invincible?" He drew a gun from his waist and raised it to point at Hoffman when suddenly he collapsed onto the floor, the gun resting on his right palm, his fingers twitching as they struggled to regain their grip. His face was tightened, his eyes fixed on his gun hand, with his arms and legs motionless as if bound to the floor. His men rushed to his side and tried to lift him back to his feet. Although there were 4 of them, they were unable to lift even his head. Trying different holds and leverage points to no avail, they drew their weapons and stood facing Hoffman. "Place your weapons on the floor or your boss dies," Hoffman ordered calmly. The 3 men looked at each other and Spinoza's immobile body, and then slowly complied. Immediately after the men placed their guns on the floor, Spinoza began to move again and got back onto his feet, leaving his gun on the floor. Franco, the last of Spinoza's men to place his weapon on the floor, surreptitiously reached for his ankle holster as he kept his eyes fixed on Hoffman. Hoffman snapped around to face Franco and stared at him for several moments. Franco returned Hoffman's gaze with an unabashed look, which quickly became timid and meek. He looked away from Hoffman, focusing his attention instead on the floor around him. His eyes shifted sporadically, seeming to scan an arc of empty space before him. His hands, so cool and steady a moment before, now trembled before him, on his left side, then his right. "Boss," he whispered. "It would be wise not to challenge me," Hoffman explained as he turned from Franco, who continued to stare nervously at the surrounding floor. Gesturing towards the space around Franco, Hoffman added, "They don't like you. You'd better run." Franco backed away from the floor space he had been tremulously holding out his hands against. He turned his legs and stumbled into a run while still looking over his shoulder. "Franco, relax," one of Spinoza's men whispered. Franco did not relax. In fact, he ran the length of the room, thrashing his arms to one side, then the other. His gaze was so intent on the floor alongside him that he ran straight into a light wooden railing surrounding an elevator shaft. The railing splintered and Franco fell with a shriek into the darkness of the 30-foot shaft. The shrieking ended with a loud thud, then a muffled silence, which hung over the men in the room. "I hope we don't need any more demonstrations," Hoffman announced as he moved for the first time from the window. Spinoza had collected himself and was standing now, with his remaining 3 men close by. "What are you doing?" Williams whispered to Hoffman anxiously. "You ask too many questions, Williams. Are you with me? Because if you're not with me, you're against me. Which is it? Decide quickly." "I'm with you, absolutely, all the way," Williams stammered. "Then no more questions." Hoffman raised his voice, speaking now to Spinoza and his men. "As I was saying, I can make you more powerful than you can imagine." "What for?" Spinoza asked. "What do you want from me?" "I need your guns and your men. Are you interested? Or should I be speaking to another organization?" "I'm interested," Spinoza snapped. "I'm interested in how you did that to me." "One thing at a time." "What's our percentage?" "What do you want? Control? Turf? Just do what I need you to do first. How many men do you have?" 30, but I can get 60 easy." "Let's talk." Hoffman gestured for Spinoza to come over by him. The 2 men moved over to the side wall and spoke quietly, leaving Miller and Williams standing alone opposite Spinoza's men. The 5 men were casting intermittent glances at the elevator shaft. "Should we see if he's alive?" Miller asked. Spinoza's men took the lead and scuttled to the top of the shaft. Franco was motionless on the platform below. "Boss," one of Spinoza's men interrupted. "You want us to check if Franco's alive?" Spinoza turned towards his men and opened his mouth to speak. "He's not," Hoffman rebutted. "But if you'd like to see for yourself, go ahead, bring up the elevator." The 5 men stood around the elevator shaft as the unpleasant sight drew nearer and nearer, the sound of the elevator motor and cables blotting out Hoffman and Spinoza's ongoing conversation. While Spinoza's men were no strangers to blood or dead bodies, the sight was a novel experience for the congressman and the stockbroker, who shifted their positions frequently, stepping back in increments as the elevator platform brought its load up further and further into plain sight. It was an ugly sight. Franco's body was twisted upon itself, contorted by the violence of his fall. Neither Miller nor Williams had ever witnessed a man's death before. They stood like gapers alongside a highway accident, consumed with curiosity, revolted by what they saw, yet unable to turn away. Within a few minutes, Spinoza returned to his men and gave them some quiet instructions. The 3 men then carried off their comrade, walking behind Spinoza, while Miller and Williams returned to Hoffman, keeping their eyes fixed on the door with only a few momentary glances towards Hoffman. That evening in Manhattan, Silverman's nephew, Jonathan, returned to his uncle's apartment, finding him sitting in his chair by the window, a glass in his hand and a pitcher on the table beside him. "How are you doing, Uncle Paul?" he asked him. "Heard anything more from... what was his name?"
"Karl? No, Karl Hoffman. That's his name. You should remember it. I'm sure he'll be famous someday."
"I don't trust him."
"Oh, he may be a hothead, but what is he going to do? Stop me from publishing my own research? This is my work. He has no say in it, right?" Dr. Silverman asked as he filled his glass with water from the pitcher.
"Absolutely," Jonathan affirmed, looking at his uncle with some concern. "Are you sure you're all right? You seem awfully thirsty."
"Yes, I'm fine. Just a lot on my mind,"
Silverman said, rising to go to the bathroom. "You going to bed soon?" Jonathan asked as he went into the guest room to get ready for bed.
Yes, but you go ahead. I'll just be up a little longer," his uncle responded.
When he came out of the bathroom, he started down the hall towards his bedroom, then halted, going to his chair by the window instead. Standing over his chair, he drank another glass of water, then brought the pitcher to the kitchen sink where he filled it to the rim. He sat back down in his chair, refilled his glass, and held it close to his lips with both hands, as a man drawn out of freezing waters might hold a hot cup of coffee. He drank the water in a steady, purposeful manner, staring out at the lights across the East River. The following morning, the sun was again shining through the window as it rose over Brooklyn, sparkling in the water at the bottom of Dr. Silverman's glass, which rested on a small table beside his armchair. Jonathan came out from his room to find his uncle still in the armchair, his head slumped forward. "You fell asleep in the chair?" Jonathan asked him. "Come lie down for a bit, or you'll have a stiff neck." Jonathan put his hand on his uncle's shoulder to pull him upward when, touching the skin of his neck, he recoiled at an unexpected coldness. He knelt down in front of the chair and gently pushed his uncle's shoulders back, falling away in horror as his uncle's knees rose in unison with his torso, his body stiff with rigor mortis. His uncle was dead. Paramedics confirmed Dr. Silverman's death at the scene, and when the police arrived, Jonathan insisted that Karl Hoffman had done something to his uncle the previous day. Frantically, he described the scene he had witnessed, the anger with which Hoffman had spoken to his uncle, and how he had threatened to stop him from publishing his work. The police asked the usual questions, looking for means and opportunity. Had Dr. Hoffman given Dr. Silverman anything to eat or drink? Did he have access to his food, his water, any other means of poisoning him? Jonathan answered all the questions by shaking his head. He had just come in, started yelling at his uncle, paced back and forth, and then left. "He did something, I tell you," Jonathan reiterated. "He did something. He got into his head somehow." This last suggestion brought an end to the officers' questioning. They traded looks with each other, notepads were closed, and Jonathan was reassured that they would do everything possible to investigate the case thoroughly. In the interest of completeness, 2 uniformed officers were dispatched in Brooklyn to question Hoffman at his home. The assignment fell to 2 rookies, William O'Malley and Rick Hardin. The 2 arrived at Hoffman's residence, and finding the front door ajar, they entered the house, sidestepping boxes of books on the floor. Hardin took the upstairs and had finished clearing all the rooms when he heard a sound below. Running downstairs, he discovered O'Malley collapsed in a hallway. Checking his partner's pulse, Hardin drew his weapon and moved to the end of the hallway, where he saw Hoffman making his way towards the back door. "Turn around with your hands up," Hardin leveled his weapon at Hoffman and stood immobile for several seconds as his partner O'Malley rose from the floor.
"What are you doing?" O'Malley asked, coming alongside Hardin. "Cuff him!"
"Where is he?" Hardin yelled out, glancing back and forth. The two looked at the small entryway, the closed back door and the walls on either side.
"Did he go out the back door?" O'Malley asked.
"The door never opened," Hardin insisted. "I was looking straight at him, then he was gone."
"He disappeared?"
"I was looking straight at him, then I was looking at the back door. It never opened, I tell you," Hardin repeated. Then, turning toward O'Malley, he asked, "Are you okay?"
"Yeah, I'm fine."
The two went to the back door, opened it, and looked out into the small backyard. Additional police officers arrived, and together they carried out a thorough search, upstairs, downstairs, and around the entire grounds of the house. But Hoffman was already gone, making his way with calm, resolute strides through the back alleyways of Brooklyn.